Hello. Good morning. Good morning. Hello. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the panel that was here before, warming up the stage with all the Black Girl magic. Because as we know, there are a lot of barriers of entry into the podcast community, media in general. And obviously, we want to talk about those. And once we get to these places where we are allowing ourselves to be bold enough to have our own platforms, how do we utilize those platforms in order to make sure that we are looking out for legislation, cultural significant campaigns, things that we could be doing with our platform in order to enrich our community? So that's what we're going to be talking about here today with my special guest. So here's what we're doing. First of all, Adjoa, why don't you have a seat real quick, girl? Because what I decided to do today is going to be a little bit different from the other panels. First of all, Adjoa B. Asamoah is really the reason why the Crown Act, huge reason why the Crown Act is in existence, and we'll have more conversations about that. But I want to start with how we got here today. My name is Erica Cobb. I am the host of Comeback with Erica Cobb, which started as a YouTube show in 2016, and it was my conduit to securing my job as a national talk show host on the daytime show Daily Blast Live, which airs weekdays in most markets around 3 p.m. We just took Ellen's time slot. Thank you very much. And you can also follow us on YouTube and social media. And what ended up happening was, from me making a decision to start my own podcast, it also was the conduit for me to start my own talk show. And then I got this platform and realized that I need to be leveraging my platforms and my opportunities for people who look like me and for the amplification of voices that aren't normally amplified. So, much to my surprise, in the universe that has its own way, a year after I took my natural hair journey and decided that I would only be wearing natural hairstyles and protective styles on air, the next year I was asked to speak at the House about the Crown Act. So that all ties in today. So we are doing a meta version of the podcast. And here's my guest. So it's the unique role of being a queen of color can come with a crown of curls, braids, kinks, twists, locks, and afros, or just beautiful brown skin. This was generally viewed as a justified threat in America up until the Crown Act. Before this important legislation, it was legal to discriminate against Americans for wearing natural hairstyles. Today, on Comeback with Erica Cobb, we have a very special guest, the queen behind the Crown Act, Adjoa B. Asamoah. Welcome to Comeback with Erica Cobb.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, before we get started, I really want to talk about some of the things that I'm going to give you a little pat on the back, okay? There's going to be some flowers here today. Because you're not only the history making policy architect behind the Crown Act, you're an advisor for the Biden Harris camp. You served as the Black Engagement Director for the 59th Presidential Inaugural Committee, and you are currently the first senior advisor for racial equity to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Secretary. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me and for leveraging where you sit to help elevate issues that matter. It's truly a collective effort, and I'm grateful for your work.
Well, I'm grateful for your work because without you, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. I really do find it to be a very special privilege to, first of all, be in a privileged position to start a platform. And when I say in a privileged position, I understand there's so many barriers of entry for so many people. And the idea of having the audience to even want to hear what's important to me because it represents what's important to them. And with you and the Crown Act, that really is kind of the genesis of what was important to you that's representing what's important to those who look like you. So, can you talk about more of the genesis of the Crown Act?
Well, again, thank you so much for having me. I was at Essence Festival in 2018, and I met these three dynamic sisters. who were talking about how can we address this issue of race-based hair discrimination. It is a long-standing and problematic practice of racial discrimination in the form of hair discrimination. And we were kicking around ideas, and given where I sit, as you shared, I work at the intersection of policy and politics, although I have to note I am here in my personal capacity as the Crown Act champion. And I said, well, this is clearly a civil rights issue. And so they were tossing around like maybe we try to address, artificial intelligence or, tackle the issue of, not having enough images of Black women in their natural hair and protective styles. And I said, that's actually not it. We are going to change the law. And because none of them, they're all bosses in their respective spaces, but none of them sort of understood policy change, legislation, et cetera. And so when I said, we are going to change laws, they were like, what you mean? And I was like, we're going to change the law and I know how to do it. And so given everything that the Essence Festival is, that actually serves as the backdrop for how the co-creators of the Crown Coalition came together. But I do need to share, just in terms of my work, advancing racial equity has been my life's work. So before it was popular or profitable, we're talking 30 years, and when I was almost kicked out of college for protesting. And so having done that organizing work, that is how I built the skill set to be able to do a Crown Act. So there are a number of bills that I've written even prior to the Crown Act, a number of relationships that I've forged working at the intersection of policy and politics. And so having those relationships and that powerful network that I could leverage, that's how we were able to create a Crown Act movement.
Adjoa, I so appreciate you saying how long you've been putting in the work, because much like when we think about fame or viral ability, all of those things seem to be like, oh, it happened overnight. And when you're talking about advocacy and the change of legislation, there is so much time and effort that goes into that work. That being said, there is a very interesting intersectionality between what happens in a very viral world and the ability to take people like yourselves, causes like the Crown Act, and for creators to amplify. So, how has that piece of the puzzle, especially with all the social media platforms, with podcasts, really helped the Crown Act and helped your work?
Just in general, championing change can be sparked by one person. I take great pride in having conceptualized the Crown Act and leading the movement. And there's a song, I'm a movement by myself, but I'm a force when we're together. That means that, yes, I can come up with an idea, I can work with a dynamic team to, sort of bring it to fruition. But there is no real national movement that at this point is genuinely international. I get calls from the continent of Africa, from Europe, the Caribbean. I get calls from everywhere like, we want to do the Crown Act too. The role that you play in leveraging where you sit again to elevate the issue, it is invaluable. People have to know about the work. I always tell people I am extremely proud of my work on the Crown Act. But it's not the first bill that I've ever championed. It's not the first legislation I've ever helped to write. It's not even the first campaign I've done. It's somewhere along the lines of like number 10. And the difference is people cared so much about this because they, their own lived experiences and, just understanding the need for Black children to be in schools that are conducive to their thriving and success versus being told that you can't participate in your graduation ceremony because you're rocking locks, or having a child be forced to make a decision he should never have to make, and that is to either have your identity attacked and your locks cut in order to wrestle, and you had earned the right to participate, based on talent, or having a little Black girl sent home in tears because she's rocking braids just like I am. That whole thing, it is a collective movement. So again, I'm grateful to, be the Crown Act champion and to lead this work, but there's no leading if you don't have people who are participating in it. And because I come from politics and policy, I always say our role as civically engaged members of this society can't start and stop with voting. Right. Voting is literally just one piece. And so you championing the Crown Act alongside us by elevating the issue, that's how it grew to the international movement that it is. So I am eternally grateful for people like you and others who said, yeah, actually, I'm going to talk about this. Even if companies and other people, especially in the beginning, people weren't checking for this in the beginning. So I appreciate you and applaud you for being bold and saying, not only am I going to rock my crown how I see fit, but I'm going to leverage where I sit to help amplify this work.
I love that, and I appreciate that. Harkening back to the last panel about the barriers when it comes to women of color and podcasting, and so much of them are innately rooted in the idea of the inability to have conversation without consequence. And when I think about the Crown Act, the year before, the truth was, and this is something I've been very open and honest about on my daytime talk show, is that I was not allowed to wear my hair the way I wanted to wear my hair. And as uncomfortable as that is, particularly now that I wear my hair however I want to wear my hair, that was a fight for over 2 seasons. And it wasn't until I ran into Miss Michelle Obama, who said, "Excuse me? No, no, you tell them you'll wear your hair however you want to wear your hair."
Mhm.
So I went back to my boss and I said, "Michelle Obama told me I could wear my hair however I want to wear my hair."
Yes,
And
ma'am.
lo and behold, I started wearing my hair however I wanted to wear my hair. And the next year, we're having this conversation.
Right.
And the difference between the conversation that I was having hiding behind, and I mean, is there a better person to hide behind than Michelle Obama? But I was literally like, she said,
She said,
and then I'm standing in front of lawmakers, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to say this with my whole chest.
That's right.
So when we talk about the ability to have a platform, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to feel exactly the way that I felt, although I had a platform at that time. Who am I to start this conversation? Do I have the type of following? Do I have the type of voice? What would you say to people who feel like this is something that I feel very passionate about? It's my life's work, but I may not have the type of platform or ability to amplify it.
we all have influence. We have to get out of this, thinking that in order to have influence, you have to have 1 million followers. And that was something that was echoed in the panel before us. You have influence even if it's your 10 family members around a dinner table. So because we all have influence, it is our responsibility to champion change. That can't be something that we leave solely to the lawmakers or to the people in the C-suite. Each one of us is supposed to, not can, but is supposed to leverage where we sit to move us forward. And so again, this movement is, yes, it's about changing legislation, but it is also about changing culture. And so the title of this session is spot on. Because yes, again, changing legislation, but changing culture. And when you were talking about your experience, even with your own entity, about not being able to show up authentically, we know that that's a problem. This is why the Crown Act exists. For too long, there have been these Eurocentric standards of beauty that said that we are not beautiful. We're not beautiful based on our complexion. We're not beautiful based on our hair. Despite the fact that our hair grows out of our head in a specific way, we have been taught that we are not beautiful. And so we are not only changing the laws, but we're also challenging this notion that beauty is only one way and it only looks one way. And so I'm always, as an African, always ensuring that I'm lifting the African aesthetic as well.
I want to take a moment and really acknowledge the diversity of those of you who are sitting and listening to this conversation, engaging right now, because I think that's one thing that a lot of people ask me about. I will very much always talk about and amplify issues, legislation, things that have not been amplified because they affect people like me. And oftentimes, my audience is very much composed of this amount of diversity. A lot of people, especially particular people of color, feel some type of way about having inside conversations as they perceive outside. I think it's very important to engage with people who don't look like us as well and have directives as to how they can better be a part of the journey, because as we know, Black women are always at the forefront of most of this change. So what would you say to people who are like, I'm actively allies, I'm actively listening, how do I actively participate?
Well, one, I am very thoughtful about language. It may be the former or recovering, I should say, adjunct professor in me. But an ally is not a title that you can sort of just give yourself. It is one that has to be earned, and then we must bestow it upon you. So there is a difference between, caring and being an ally. So I always like to clarify, we have to call you an ally. You can't call yourself an ally. But with that, there are, of course, people who, when you think about building a coalition for progress, it's not just going to be you and the people who, look like you. Not always. That's also important. Again, collective movement and progress requires a collective approach. Just passed the Crown Act in Texas. Not known for being, overly bipartisan or candidly, again, personal capacity, or being, a place that is progressive. We passed the Crown Act in the state of Texas, not a bill inspired by the Crown Act, but the actual Crown Act, which outlaws race-based hair discrimination with overwhelming bipartisan support. In Texas, it is not very diverse, the legislature. The Republicans are in control of both chambers in the state legislature, in addition to the executive branch. Did a bill signing with the governor, who I don't agree with much, just again, personal capacity. We don't agree on much, but we were able to pass the Crown Act with bipartisan support, overwhelming bipartisan support, including with a Republican sponsor. And so I always tell people, protecting people's civil rights is not the responsibility of one person. It is the responsibility of all lawmakers, independent of racial identity, independent of party affiliation. And so when you talk about working collectively, as you were asking the question, it really requires us to think about the end goal. And the end goal requires coalition building, and that's what I specialize in.
When you're talking about the overwhelming bipartisan support, I'm thinking about how we receive media and how we say what we're receiving, how we're consuming it. Because the truth is, there are so many people with platforms. And as sensitive as you are about the word ally, rightfully so, I am very sensitive about the word journalist. Because while I am someone who has a platform that is definitely owned by a news group, I'm also someone who has an independent platform. And a lot of what I talk about is, yes, of course, I want to be factually sound, but it's also very opinion based, which is very different from the journalism that we grew up with and think about, it's not about your opinion, it's
right.
about the facts.
That's right.
So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And how do you tell people or instruct people on how to digest what they're receiving? Because the notion of what happened in Texas is very different if you listen to certain, quote, journalists with platforms. So how do we discern the truth from what we feel?
That's probably a whole nother section, candidly. But I think it's important, one, to just acknowledge the difference. We're in an era still, I think, where fact checking is important, and recognizing that your opinion is not necessarily fact. And so as consumers of media, we have to be able to filter out, what is opinion and what is fact. And if something is solely an opinion, then you receive it as such. But if it's a fact, then you receive it as such. And so I think that there's a lot of, to your point, just sort of lack of respect for opinion, because people are entitled to have those. In addition to journalism, I am very mindful about respecting people's area of expertise. We are in this era now where everybody and their mom is talking about they are advancing racial equity. And then when I'm having a conversation, I'm like, you literally don't know what it means. And so I think it's also our responsibility to ensure that we are respecting people's areas of expertise.
I think we also, in my opinion, it is important to also acknowledge when opinions, because much like my opinion that I would be better served wearing my natural hair on television, was also a fact.
Fact. Facts.
Opinions can transition into facts as well. It could be the conduit to the change in everything. I want to open up a couple of minutes for anyone in the audience who might have a question for my guest or myself. Yes, we'll get you a mic.
Good morning. I'm sorry, I just put a mitt in my mouth. I apologize.
I'm sorry, we're
I
having
just put a
difficulty.
mitt in my mouth, so I apologize.
Okay.
My name is Cedella Morgan. I've been podcasting for 8 years as of last month. And my podcast is about childlessness. That's one of my podcasts.
Child what?
Childlessness. It's called Childless Not by Choice. So that's my podcast. And the reason I'm even mentioning that is, well, my family also calls me the letter writer because I'm into writing letters to organizations when I'm not happy about something. So I'm getting ready to write a letter to the TSA. And I don't know if this is going to cause me to be pulled aside every time I travel, but for the last 3 times that I have traveled, my hair has been checked. And so I didn't know what this is what the subject would be about today. My hair was pretty much like this when I traveled from Orlando. And they pulled me aside, they checked me, but then as a last little touch, the TSA agent went like this. And I don't know what I could possibly have been hiding in my ponytail. It's not even long enough for anything to be in there, but it was out like this. So I just need to know if you can give me some input as to how to how to go on with this, because I will be writing a letter. I can't take it anymore, but I want to know from your point of view what I can do and what I should or should not say.
Sure, I'm happy to chat offline, just so that I can get more details. I'm very mindful about speaking without having all of the details, so I'm happy to chat offline and then perhaps give you guidance accordingly if that's okay. Okay, good.
Hi, how are you? I'm louder. My name is Farah. I'm the co-host of System Kill podcast. So we're a true.
No
Sister, wait, say the
way!
name of
Are
the
you
sister.
serious?
Yes.
Oh my God, I love you!
Cool. I love you too.
Here for the black girl magic. Oh, as always.
Yes, anytime they're walking around somewhere. So, our podcast focuses on crimes committed by Black women, and one of the things that we have seen is that when women are taken away from their families and given harsher sentences than their white counterparts, it affects the families as well as the treatment that Black women get in the prison system. Do you guys have any advice or any experience reaching out to lawmakers, reaching out to other lawyers to expand your network to start putting in programming to help those that are incarcerated or less or not as exposed in the community to hopefully stop crimes from happening, and so that women that are on trial for different crimes get the proper representation and the proper treatment in prisons? Any insight would be great.
Sure. So the obvious answer, or maybe not so obvious, is absolutely. We know that the disparities exist across spaces and across issues. And so we know that, Black women have often received disproportionate discipline across a number of spaces, starting in school, which is what I actually moved to DC in order to do, which was to dismantle the school to prison pipeline with a focus on ensuring that Black girls were not receiving more harsh discipline than others. So that is sort of even how I got into the space. Got sucked into electoral politics, but Nobel Women, which is the national organization of Black elected legislative women, is a point of contact for you. In addition to NBCSL, which is the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, Of course, there is the Congressional Black Caucus, known as the CVC, very acronym intensive space, working in politics and policy. But then also, although it's the executive branch, I would encourage you to reach out to mayors, in particular African American Mayors Association, known as AMA. That is one organization, because sometimes it's not necessarily legislative. Not every problem has to be fixed legislatively. Sometimes it's programmatic. And so if I can get a better understanding of what it is you want to do and what states you want to work in, I'm happy to share contact information. There is no pride in holding on to information and being the keeper of all information. So happy, more than happy to share information with you, sis. Yes.
We're launching a new podcast called It's Criminal. We're addressing the inequities in the family court system. And so there are racial inequities, there are financial inequities, there are cultural inequities, there are gender inequities. My question is, we're going to begin to expose what's happening in the courtroom by training people to be courtroom observers so we can talk about what's happening in the courtroom. But how do you get legislative support when we're going to be exposing attorneys, and most legislatures are attorneys themselves?
So I will share, strategy is the name of the game. Again, I talked about Texas, and that's something that nobody saw coming, including the lawmakers themselves. I can talk to you about strategy. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach to this work. I will just share, though, for the audience, is lawmakers often know two types of people. They know big fundraisers, for obvious reasons, just keeping it 100. But they also know troublemakers like me. Good trouble, according to the late, great John Lewis. But they know the people who can rally people and bring together coalitions. And so they won't necessarily just dismiss you because you are shedding light on an issue. We have to make sure that we are understanding that our job is not to just criticize. I'll show up and criticize. I got my own chair at the hearing, and they know if I don't like it, I'm coming, so prepare. I have my own seat. But they also respect people who bring legislation to them. The Crown Act was not birthed by a lawmaker. I mean, it's their bill once they introduce it, but that was born externally. It's something that I came up with in my head. And so you can also bring legislation if required, or you can bring fixes to problems. Lawmakers, more often than not, want to be reelected. And so when they understand that you, given where you sit, if you are an organizer and you can bring together a group of people, they work for you unless or until you decide they don't. And so when they realize that, if you show up and you keep showing up, because once is not going to work, but if you show up 10, 15 times, you're not going away. And so it's very hard to lie to people or to dismiss people who are consistent. So there's a whole coalition building strategy, but there's also I want to work with you to fix this problem, and fixing problems makes them look good. So there is incentive to work with people.
Hi, my name is Hendel, and I'm the manager of podcast and audio at Race Forward. And earlier this year, we had a big win in partnering with the White House on a podcast episode with the Domestic Policy Council on the President Biden's second executive order on racial justice. Now, my question to you is, how do you see podcasters' role moving forward in building democracy or sustaining a multiracial democracy?
For me specifically?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure, because the sister obviously is the expert on leveraging a platform in order to move the needle. I will say I'm looking at the countdown. I am happy to chat with you. Of course, in my other capacity, I worked on that legislation and helped draft the racial equity plan for this entire administration. And so I am happy to connect with you and talk about the role that you can play, but ultimately it's to leverage your voice to amplify the need and to get other people to work with you in order to push the needle.
Any other questions? Well, I want to acknowledge, first of all, my guest Adjoa, and how we are sitting at the stage together.
Yes.
Because there is a team of leveraging like machines, Grand Rising talent
That's
right
right.
here. You know, I had this moment with my bestie in my head, one of my besties from Sisters Who Kill. I want to acknowledge how important this moment was because it's so indicative of what happens when we leverage our platforms, when we start to engage with one another, because we are always going to be stronger together.
That's right.
I found Sisters Who Kill because I was listening to a podcast by the Ebony K. Williams. She has an amazing podcast. She uses her legal roots in order to advance the things that are most important in our community. And on her podcast, I heard a ad for Sisters Who Kill, and through Holding Court with Ebony K. Williams, just check that out too. And so this is a very full circle moment. I've never met Marar Taz. I wouldn't have. I'm so excited. But I think that it's very indicative of what it takes to come together and be able to amplify the things that are most important in our communities and to us. So with that, Adjoa, I thank you so much for your time, for your expertise. How can everyone find and follow you?
Well, again, thank you for all of the work that you do and for inviting me to share the stage with you. Got to shout out the sister here who is the brilliant mind behind even putting things together. People can certainly follow me. I am Adjoa B Asamoah across platforms. And so follow the legislation, reach out to me if you're interested in getting involved. And I love to teach effective advocacy. So happy to come talk to folks about how to do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. I'm Erica Cobb. This has been Comeback with Erica Cobb. Thank you for your time.